Thank you. Good afternoon. It's very nice to be here. So many nationalities, so many contributions. It's a little bit like Eurovision Song Contest. And the contribution from the Netherlands is on vocabulary acquisition. And in Dutch linguistics, we have a long tradition of researching language acquisition, but not from ancient Greek or Latin. So we started just a few years ago, and now we have about 3 students studying the acquisition of ancient Greek and Latin. Most researchers and teachers, as you also are, will agree that it's very important to learn vocabulary when you learn a foreign language. And many studies are available on the vocabulary acquisition of Spanish, of French, of English, of whatever kind of language. But on ancient Greek, there are just very few publications. So in this presentation, which is very short, just 15 minutes, I will only present the background of research. I will present the results and some general conclusions, but there's not enough time to discuss the methodology in detail. So for the methodology, I refer at the last page to a website on which I have published more articles. So what I will discuss here is how can we learn vocabulary? And I will compare an activity-based approach, learning by doing things with vocabulary, compared to a paired associate, which can be defined as the old-fashioned traditional way of learning by means of a bilingual word list. The second topic is the definition of difficult words. Can we define in advance the difficulty of a word? Are there several parameters which make a word difficult to learn or not? And also the role of the Greek alphabet may make it more difficult for children to learn. Of course not for the Greek children, because they are familiar with the Greek alphabet, I suppose. But the Dutch children and many others have to learn also the alphabet, not only the words, but also the alphabet. To what extent makes it more difficult? So what I aim with this discussion is mostly to stimulate a discussion on ancient Greek and maybe also on Latin, language acquisition, more specifically vocabulary acquisition, because you as a teacher know something about learning vocabulary, but I hope that I can show you some more aspects of the big issue of learning a language. And I hope to do it by adding experimental data. The theoretical background, very short. Knowledge of vocabulary is very important in foreign language learning, and according to Nation, speakers should have access to about 95% of the vocabulary of a text. 95% is a very big percentage to understand the text. More precisely, it means that they have to know about 5,000 words or 3,000 word families. So how can this status of knowing 5,000 or more words be achieved? And the second question I already mentioned, are there innate difficult words? And is the Greek alphabet problematic? Well, there is sparse research to ancient Greek. The textbooks, at least the textbook we have in the Netherlands, they provide bilingual word lists. So it seems that the writers, the authors of the textbooks, assume this is the best way. But there may be some other ways as well. The vocabulary activities we find in textbooks for other languages like French or English mostly are lacking in the textbooks of ancient Greek. So if we assume that for French it's very good to do activities, can we incorporate this idea also for ancient Greek? We don't know, not yet. And also Greek has some peculiarities as compared to French. So I wanted to have more experimental data to find out whether the activity-based approach can be incorporated in Greek education as well. What is special about ancient Greek? It's not a spoken language, at least it's not in the Netherlands. We have a very traditional method of teaching, learning grammar and words and then translation. The alphabet is different. Some of the concepts are very unfamiliar. I remember one of my first Greek words was the word for chastity. I was 12 years old. And the input of ancient Greek is limited to the classroom, whereas English, French, especially English, you can find on the internet and elsewhere. So the children are of school age, and many of the experiments conducted for the modern languages are conducted with students who are paid. So that's different than children from 13, 14-year-old sitting in a school class and they have to learn because the teacher is telling them they have to learn all those difficult words. Usually they are beginners in the language. There's a diversity of items. Most research, they have items which are very manipulated, like only nouns or only verbs. And every pupil has its own learning preference. The first topic, the learning approaches. There are two main approaches, as I've mentioned before, activity-based and paired associate. Paired associate, according to Mondria and de Groot, is the best, is most effective, because when you learn a new word, you know the concept already. I know this is a table, and I only have to learn some sounds, new sounds, trapezi, let's say, to not learn the word in Greek. So if you do something else, it's just time consuming. The activity-based approach, let's say Hulstein and Laufer, and there are many others, they say, well, this is most effective because the pupil, the student, is more involved in learning the new word, and by more involvement means that he will remember it much better. And both approaches are supported by experimental data. So I will show you my experimental data. I had 3 test conditions, 3 groups, 3 classes. One class had a learning assessment by means of a multiple choice task, which is activity-based. The other one had the word list, and the third class had a combination of both. First the multiple choice exercise, and then the word list. They had the same time, 20 minutes to learn the items, and there was an immediate post-test which was announced. 1 week later, I did a second post-test which was unannounced. And here you see the results. The paired associate, the traditional method, is best in the immediate post-test and the delayed post-test. So it seems that it's a very good way of learning vocabulary. But when forgetting words, the best, which means you don't forget that much words, is the activity-based approach, the multiple choice exercise. So my conclusion based on these data of these pupils is that the traditional method is very good for the beginning, but to remember the words, you should do something more than just having the word list. And everything here, all the numbers are statistically significant. And you can see here the conclusions I just mentioned. So defining difficult words. According to the code, it is possible. There are several parameters which make a word more difficult to learn. I have based my experiment on these results and added one more parameter. She says that the phonetic form, the pronunciation, when it's easy, more familiar to your own language, it's easier to learn. When it's very unfamiliar, it's more difficult to learn, because then you have more activities in the brain, because you have to learn also a kind of pronunciation you're not familiar with. The meaning, abstract versus concrete. She says that words with an abstract meaning are more difficult to learn because when learning those words there are more brain activities involved. And I added the parameter of grammatical category because she tested only nouns. So maybe verbs or adjectives are more difficult than nouns, and maybe it's related to the B parameter. A verb is more abstract than adjectives and nouns, and maybe adjectives are more abstract than nouns. So for these categories, in the same line, more brain activities are needed. So I had all parameters tested in a learning assessment, an announced post-test immediately, and there were no significant results. Which means that the difficulty of words cannot be defined in terms of these parameters of pronunciation, meaning, and grammatical category. But if you ask a teacher, if you would have asked me, can you say what words are difficult, I would have given you an answer, not something like I don't know. And maybe most of you would say, well, this word is more difficult than that word. What do we think? On what basis do we say a word is more difficult? I can show you the graphs. I cannot show you the graphs because these are the graphs. What I did, I can tell you what is in the graphs you don't see. What I did, I made a ranking of the results of the students, and a ranking, I asked the teachers, by means of the VCN, what do you think of this word? Is it difficult or not? And they gave stars to the words. And based on those answers, I had a mean, an average of the stars, and I made a ranking of difficulty. And I compared both rankings, the estimation of the teachers, related to the results of the test. And there was absolutely no correlation, which is a contradictio in terminis. The correlation was minus 0.05, which is nothing. So I was thinking, what do the teachers think then? Why do they answer this is difficult or not? So I made a second ranking based on frequency of the words. And I compared the frequency with the ranking frequency with the ranking of the teachers. And there was an almost perfect correlation of 0.75. Unfortunately, it doesn't show, but you can look on my website, there the graphs are shown. So the teachers base their answers, what is difficult, on the frequency, on their own familiarity. And I think that's a caveat for all teachers, including me. What you think is difficult may not be difficult for the children. So the third topic, I can be very short about it, is the role of the alphabet. Greek has a different alphabet, and I was wondering whether that makes the learning words more difficult. According to some teachers, it is. So I had two groups, one group with experience of 1 year and a half, and the other group 3 years and a half. And in both groups, half of the children were learning the words in Greek alphabet, and the other half was learning the words in transcription, in Latin transcription. There was an immediate post-test announced with absolutely no significant results. So the general conclusions, you can see paired associate is very effective as a learning approach, but activities can help it much more, can help the deep processing, the remembering of words. Difficult words cannot be defined a priori, and teachers have a different idea of difficult words than the pupils have, at least based on the experimental data. And the alphabet plays no role in learning vocabulary. So thank you, and you can see here the address of the website where I can read more.